And next, we're going to continue on the topic of API vulnerability. So we have Tomer from LSA7 Defense, who's going to be joining us on the stage.
Hi, Annika.
Good morning, Tomer. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to presenting such an interesting seminar.
Excellent. So I'm going to leave you on the stage. I'd like you to start with a brief introduction of who you are, what you're going to be talking about, and then I'll join you back here in about 20 minutes, so we have time for some audience questions at the end.
Perfect.
Stage is yours.
Thank you. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My presentation is state about the new API vulnerability frontier, and I used a very famous quote about how with great strength comes great responsibility. There's really two sides of the API paradigm that shift the way you look at the API, the effect of API from one hand, and the responsibility, the attack surface, the exposure that we have on the other hand. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what should you look for when looking for securing API, about new tactics and new technologies, and how you can provide a better security overall around it. As I mentioned, my name is Tomer Nuri. I'm the founder of a company called the Cyber Edge in Israel. It's a cyber strategic services. I've been around the world of cyber for over 30 years, and I'm acting as the active chief solution architect for Layer 7 Defense. Layer 7 Defense is a private company, a very innovative company running for over 6 years, which has developed an API defense solutions around the world of AI-driven security. And it's really focused on the different elements of providing application security for the different challenges, from the DDoS perspective to the bots to the application. But the main, I think, differentiating factors and what's keeping us busy the last 2 years is our ability to secure API and provide kind of an advanced machine learning algorithm to detect both vulnerabilities in existing APIs and obviously detect attack and cyber hackers that help happening in this environment. So I will show some of the experience we had with that. We talk about the quote. Obviously, everybody refers to the quote of how with great powers comes great responsibility. The famous quote coming from Spider-Man Uncle in the Uncle Ben in the first movie, when Spider-Man just started to get his powers. But the real origin is coming from Voltaire, which is a French novelist, because it connects to the idea of the event itself being in Paris. But as a basic, APIs really define this paradigm. How APIs, it changes the market. That's the great power. From one hand, from the other end, we see a lot of vulnerabilities out there. So we see a lot of attack surface. We see a delay in something the market to defend itself. So that's the responsibility part. So we'll talk about these two paradigms and in this entire spectrum. We start with the strength. Well, obviously, no one can deny that API has been a huge catalyst in the actual digital transformation. I mean, a lot of people and users and customers are not aware that every time today when they are using their social applications, or whenever they are sharing something from their favorite news application to their favorite instant messaging application, they are using APIs. Every time they are ordering their preferred meal, they're using APIs. Sometimes it can be very basic, very dense. Obviously, whenever they are accessing their financial application, for example, their own bank application, and we are that whenever they're using open banking, they are using a lot of API in this. But that's not the entire spectrum. APIs is shifted and changed every aspect in the way that we work and correlate. So basically, everything that we do today around world information technology, about mobile, about even IoTs and OTs, medical, and obviously with supply chain and retail and finance, everything is being fueled and being enabled by the growth of APIs and the dependencies we have around APIs for that. So that's a major issue. And APIs are not something new. I mean, we had APIs with us from the 70s of the previous centuries, where the API were more hardware driven, to the evolution to the open environments, the different Java aspects, all the way to what we look today when we're looking on a multi-tier APIs, which are much more complex, more advanced, and have more control, but still increased our dependencies and still becoming more and more advanced and a big part of that evolution. In essence, basically, APIs allow us to change the dialect. We start talking about servers and we started to talk about services. And not only that, we basically built a marketplace where API can generate revenues. I mean, there's not a single network application running today that you can think about that is not building and basing the entire business foundation around APIs. So APIs are a true force in generating revenues and building, throttling this entire economy to the next phases. So there's no going back, and we see more and more advances both in the standard APIs and proprietary APIs. In essence, a few years ago, Akamai's released an indication says that over 35% of all web traffic is API related. That was a few years ago. I could say that it's over 90% now, which means the old concept of having a static traffic or basic HTML traffic, it's really became a relic of the past. Everything is API driven. Whenever you have a query, whenever you have information running, you have an API in there. You may know it, you may not secure it, but it's API related. Now, basically, we are also changing the way that we design our software and application environments, and kind of shifted along the years from the concept of the monolithic approach, when we once used everything in one package, one server had the front-end application, the back-end, the business logic, the databases, and we started to understand that we need to have a more distributed concept. So we started to take different elements and building to dedicated environments, and maybe started to relate more to cloud and web services around that. Have more separation to microservices, and the evolution that goes to containers and serverless and so on, and it's still advancing. And as long as we are progressing, we are getting more flexibilities, we are getting more capabilities, but in fact we are putting more dependencies around API out there. So now API are not just from the B2C concepts or to B2B. They are part of the fabric that builds our application. They are inside of the application, inside the environment. And the dependencies we have on API, and the fact that API is becoming the soft point for cyber events, will just get more and more complex and more central. This is why we look today, when we look about API vulnerabilities, we look at a full stack approach. I mean, the vulnerability, the explosion can come from the client side, whether it's a standard client or mobile client. It can be a file-based or even a file-less. Going to the server, the front end, the back end, but also more complex events to see today. A lot of hidden and more advanced attacks. It goes directly to the database, more invasive capabilities. And as long as we keep building more distributed environments, we have more and more API. Nowadays, we are now required to secure not only the API between the user and the application, between our application and our business partner, but inside our own data center, inside our own container, inside our own microservice environments, there are internal APIs that have to be secured as well. So taking that into consideration and look at the different cyber trends that we have in API, there's a few interesting points which we should be aware of. First of all, API are now the center for a lot of major cyber events, and Those events basically lead to a breach of privacy. We have a lot of information either being leaked or exposed. A leak can be a malicious activity, exposed can be negligence or lack of control, but the outcome is the same. We see a lot of use of artificial intelligence running against us. You can see that in what we call the Gen Z version of bots. When you have bots now, they have a lot of evasive capabilities, can use a lot of authentication, evading, and deepfake, and a lot of new vectors coming from different protocols. And everything is very, very quiet and very evasive and much more difficult to identify. So in fact, that leads to a realm where, since API is so centralized, it's affect the way that we migrate to the cloud and have cloud operations. It affects our ability to have a more advanced a digital transformation due to a lot of vulnerabilities. API now also affect the world of IoT and IoT and Industry 4.0, and obviously the entire DevOps cycles and the ideas of shift left and expedite DevOps all are becoming much more vulnerable due to that. So the idea is to try to gain something which is close to the concept of zero trust. Zero trust is it's one of the ideas where you build your security with the best control and the least privilege. Obviously, there is no written doctrine for zero trust in API. API are much more complex, but we'll talk about how we can get to something which is zero trust in the concept. Due to there's so many dependencies and so much centric works around API, obviously, is that API are attracting more and more hackers and cyber actors, which means that's the focal point today, and that's the main attack surface for a lot of the campaigns that we see out there. One of the problems with API is, unlike with logical security, we are not dealing with your typical bad crowd. There's not an absolute bad user, an absolute good user. APIs are used to work with our customers, with our business partners. Some of the vulnerabilities are embedded, and there's no intelligence like you see in other cyber campaigns. There's no IOCs in the abstract layers. There's no blacklist. You really have to depend more on analytics and behavior to understand who is really bad, who is really good, and what's in between. Another issue that affects API vulnerability is the idea that if you talk about securing API, well, security, that's the work of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Operation. Now, the CISO is by far the king of his castle when it comes to security. He has full control about every analytics in there. You have information coming from the SOC and the IR teams, from endpoint detection response, from the network, even from the WAF. He has all the powers he needs to get information in there and to have the policy enforced in place. However, when it comes to API are much more complex, and a lot of times they are out of the CISO or his people level of scope for competencies. It's related to the way we develop applications, and it's not related to the abstract layer of security. It requires a more in-depth analysis of the environment where the application are working. So if you try to put a standoff between VP R&D or VP DevOps and a CISO, it usually ends like this, and that's not fair. That's not powers. CISO can provide a verdict to VP R&D. You have to back that, and you have to be able to show exactly what the vulnerability is. One of the things that we do in our system in Layer 7 Defense is whenever we have a verdict for a vulnerability in API or an actual malicious activity, we provide the vectors in a language that the DevOps people can understand. We can show them the actual frame where the vulnerability or the explosion took place. Another thing you have to remember that some of the API that we are using has been designed a while back. We have APIs running from big companies to business partners to customers. Those API were designed much before anyone even think about API security. So whatever we relate to as security guys to a vulnerability may be just a start of the future, something that it's an embedded concept. It's not malicious activity, but it's a vulnerability that can be translated into exposure or exploited, and then you can have a malicious activity in there. So we're able to understand that, and to understand either you live with that embedded feature or that vulnerabilities, or you need to close it. But you have to be able to know that. You're able to read the API stream and see not just the absolute bad, the malicious, but also see what is an embedded vulnerability that is in the code. And there's a lot out there. The way that we usually do that is, this is a snapshot from our main dashboard. This is what I call a tier 2 dashboard. It means that it's very related to security operation, guys. In one look, you can see what's happening with your API, what's your overall risk factors, what kind of attack you experienced in events. Now you can take that and you can drill down here to tier 4 and have an application level information. But at the very least, if you have a SOC, a security operations center, you can look up and see exactly what you stand up without the need to understand the different layers of the API. Now, one thing that's also kind of create a lot of effects about the level of the attack surface where API are being, is that there's this famous brick games. Well, APIs, the way APIs are built, they are very similar to the same brick structure, which is very vulnerable. We have the API landscapes, which is based on the different API domains, the servers, the endpoints, different methods and arguments, all have dependencies in them. Then we have the different environments which support the API. Those can be the identification systems, the development systems, the gateway, the load balancers, the virtual environments, all can be part of a vulnerability that can expose the API. Then if that's not complex enough, we have the regulation coming and changing things, especially if you look about Swagger's Open API and Open Banking. They will change things that will require to support anonymity and to provide Open Garden and to work from documented to undocumented, all create more complexity and more points for an attack surface to exist. Then you have your standard vulnerabilities. The previous presenter talking very, very, very interesting that there's OWASP top 10. So you have your OWASP top 10 for web and for API and for both. And some of those, although they are being documented and known, still exist. It's amazing how many APIs out there for major operations are still vulnerable to the most basic vulnerabilities in our top 10, something like broken object level authorization, which should really should be eradicated, but it still exists. And then you have the more advanced threats. When you attract more advanced attacker for more advanced APIs, you have a region Smith issues, you have the ability to spoof jobs, there's a consent violations, there's the use of advanced bots, and so on. And obviously we have different protocol on this. It's really interesting. There are some of the APIs that are basic one, the layer, the second generation API like XML, they are quite easy to manipulate, but then they're also quite easy to secure. Then you have your advanced APIs when you use multi-tier API, when you have a layer pros, when you use OAuth on top of OID, and you have a very advanced REST functionality there and borrow control, it's more secured, then it's usually also attract more advanced hackers, which means it's more difficult to identify. So it's an interesting landscape. Again, this is a full stack. I can expose any of those bricks and bring everything tumbling down because it's all part of the same structure. It's important to understand that that's paradigm, that structure also exists wherever you are using APIs in front of your mainframe for whatever it be, B2B or B2C, or if you're using an open architecture, or even if you're one of those lucky ones who already introduced a next generation ODS or in-memory systems. There are a lot of interesting solutions out there. Just an interesting project with that. If you want information, send me an email. Really interesting to see how APIs are being used in an in-memory application. It's the speed and the way that it's used. It's quite amazing. But all of those has the same level of rules and the same level of complexity, and they also have to match the different vulnerabilities that has to do with the API structure and with the other elements that I mentioned before. Obviously, whoever is known about API is going to talk about OWASP. I'm not going to talk about that because that's 2 hours session, but I just recently released a paper. You can see the link here. You can download it. I will share it in the notes. It gives an overview about the different version of OWASP and what is still the missing in the controls and how you can close that gap. Feel free to download that file. And if you have any problem getting, just send me an email. So how do you can get zero trust concept or get something close to zero trust in API? So I use the beautiful landscape of Paris for that. Obviously, you're going to have to use something that's based on AI. There's too many attributes to try and secure API in a logical way. If you try to use logical security in API, you're going to get a lot of strings, a lot of red indicators. So you have to have an API in place and a lot of automation in place. Then you have to be able to identify, discover the dependencies within the API and understand how the business logic has been violated. Again, this is a snapshot from our tool. You can see that for API domain, we have a discovery engine that will break it down from the domain level to the API groups, to the API method, all the way to the argument, and will pinpoint which attack or which vulnerability is exposed at that different level. You need to provide some sort of segmentation. Segmentation is a key part of zero trust. Obviously, you can't do segmentation API in the abstract way, but if you are able to identify PII traffic or public data traffic traversing, if you're able to tag some of the user behavior, you are able to do some sort of virtual segmentation and identify why information is running from one API to another. So you may have an API that has accounting with your business partner. That's okay. You should have PII. But if you have another API that checks the currency and rates, there's really no reason why PII should run that. This could be either a leakage or an error, or you just exposing too much information. You should be able to identify and segmentize it. Then you need to be able to tag the behavior of business partner, because your partner is part of your supply chain. You may be a victim of an attack. The same with the users. And you need to challenge everything and do it very fast, faster than the API flow, meaning every jolt, every request for change authorization challenges. We use part of our machine learning concept that we use a quasi-compiler, and we can challenge every request in real time in relation to the API time, and make sure that everything is closed and secured. And finally, you have to remember, when you're securing an API, you are not working in greenfield. You have different security elements. So you have to make sure that your API security correlates with the other security elements in there, meaning you're able to correlate with your SIEM and SOC, with your data forensics. You're able to maybe ingress some things that could do like an IOC or some sort of defense grid or defense information, connect to an automation system. Even if I have the best API security solution in the market, I don't want to stopping the attack at my system. I want to quarantine at the edge. So I have to have integration with the different security elements. That sounds like a good time now for Q&A. Yannicka, if you like.
Yes, thank you, Tomer. Bang on time. Very good. Thank you for the presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time for questions at the moment, but do you just want to quickly let the audience know how they can reach you so they can follow up with you privately after this session?
Sure. So you can contact using my email if you like, also in LinkedIn. My email is quite easy, it's like my name, tomoran@clarity7. We'll share that. And I will also put it in the comments, the link to the OAuth paper. So whoever wants to download it, feel free. I'll be more than happy to correct any questions that may arise. And thank you, Yannicka.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you.